Good morning, Faith. My name is Jeremy. I'm one of the pastors here this morning, and we get to continue into the series we began last week with Pastor Bill on practicing the way and this idea of what does it actually look like to be an apprentice of Jesus, someone who follows Jesus, someone who is working to align our entire life in his pursuit. As we go through the summer, we're going to spend most of our time looking at different disciplines, different practices that Christians throughout the centuries have felt helpful and useful in their own journey. And today, we were talking about one that's called the rule of life. Now, have you ever heard of the Japanese samurai? Probably, yeah. Legendary warriors from like feudal ancient Japan. And they're well known, especially for their distinctive armor, for the katana sword, for being these fierce warriors. Well, they weren't always just warriors. They had actually broader lives than that. Samurai in normal day-to-day life could be teachers or philosophers or government workers or farmers. They had kind of their daily lives and families, but they would step into this role as a samurai to protect when needed to go and defend their lord. I always found samurai fascinating because what's unique about them is that they lived by a really specific code. It's called the Bushido, the way of the warrior, which just sounds super cool. All right? I want to live by the way of the warrior just because it sounds neat. But that dictated how they lived their life. It had all these like loyalty and courage and things like that were these values they held in extreme. And we followed them. They follow this way throughout their entire life and would guide every decision they make. To be guided by this call, guided by the Bushido. Similarly, if you've seen The Mandalorian in the Star Wars universe, this is the way. Daniel knows, right? And the Mandalorian borrows heavily from the idea of the samurai, right? In that style, in that lifestyle, to talk about these warriors in the Star Wars universe who are governed by this very specific code they live by. And that refrain, if you've seen the show or the movie, right? This is the way. Comes up over and over again because every decision, everything they encounter is somehow governed by their way of life. Why are we fascinated by people like that? Why are we fascinated by samurai who, by the way, historically speaking, lived extremely difficult lives? Why are we fascinated by a mythical warrior called the Mandalorian? I think it's something because people with a really clear code of how they're going to live are compelling. Even if you read comic books, every anti-hero, every hero you're not supposed to root for, the reason we root for them, because they have a code. They may be horrible people, but they've got that code. We're like, oh, they're just doing what the code tells them. We find something compelling about people who have this real clarity about who they are and how they're going to live their life. The question for you is, do you have clarity of purpose? Do you have something compelling driving your life? Do you know who you are trying to be and how you will accomplish that? As followers of Christ, we're meant to. As a follower of Christ, my primary calling in life is to follow him, to be holy, to be set apart for Jesus. One of our verses in our mission statement, be, love, serve, repeat. In B, the verse we attach to that is in 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 15 and 16. And it says simply this, but as he who called you is holy, you also be holy in all your conduct, since it is written, you shall be holy, for I am holy. What does that mean? Holy? It means to be set apart, called to a higher purpose, called to live by a specific code, a specific way of life. Our model is not the Bushido. Our model isn't the way. Our model is Jesus. That's who we are trying to follow. That's who we are seeking to align our entire life to. Well, the question that comes out of that then is how will we accomplish that? How will we actually go about living a life that will reflect and look like Jesus? How will we become more like Jesus over the course of our lives? Well, an answer to that is something called the rule of life. Because here's a simple truth. There are no accidental saints. There are no accidental saints. If I want to live the life with Christ that I long for, I need a plan to make it happen. I actually need to be intentional and decide, here's how I'm going to live my life to achieve this goal. And that's what a rule of life, this discipline, is designed to accomplish. In Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 9, and today we're going to be bouncing through a whole pile of different verses, and they'll be on screen for you. If you're trying to follow along with your Bible, I love that. Please do. It's going to be a bit challenging today. Deuteronomy 4:9, here's what it says. Only take care and keep your soul diligently lest you forget the things that your eyes have seen, and lest they depart from your heart all the days of your life. Make them known to your children and your children's children. This is Moses writing. When we're in the book of Deuteronomy, it's Moses writing to Israel, and specifically he's telling them how they should live for God now in light of the fact that they're about to go and enter the promised land. And how will the rest of their lives look going forward? And Moses warns them. Clearly, he's saying, you are going to be likely to forget about God. You're going to forget who he is, and you're going to forget what he's done for you. And remember, this is a generation of people that spent the 40 years in the wilderness. They've watched God provide bread and meat every morning for them, miraculously. Their parents have seen the seas part. They've watched a pillar of cloud and a pillar of fire guide them through the desert for decades. And Moses says to them, when you get there, you're going to forget all of it. You will forget what God has done if you do not keep your soul diligently. And if that generation who had seen all these visible miracles in front of them, day after day after day, were prone to forget, how much more are we at risk of the same? 20 times in the book of Deuteronomy, Moses warns the people over and again, beware, be careful, caution about forgetting who God is and what he has done, because he was so certain that this was what was going to happen to them. And of course, if you know the story of Israel through the Old Testament, he was very right. We are prone to forget who God is, prone to forget what it means to follow him. There are no accidental saints. If we intend to follow God, we need to plan to get there. And a rule of life can be of substantial help. Now, many of you probably have not heard of this concept, a rule of life. And if you're anything like me, the second you hear rule, you kind of mentally check out. You're like, nope, I'm good, thanks. Hear rule, we feel like constrained or restricted. We're like, not interested. I got enough rules in my life. Government's trying to tell me to drive 50. I can't drive below 65, right? We don't like the idea of more rules on us, but it's not meant to be restricting. It's not meant to be confining. That's not the intent. The rule in this case is meant to create freedom, not constraints. It's meant to lift burdens off of us, not add weight onto us. Remember, one of the primary reasons that Jesus came was to free people from the burden of living underneath the law, of the Old Testament law. In Matthew chapter 11, verses 28 to 30, Jesus says this, come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you. His yoke, that means his teaching, his way, and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light. So if the rule we add makes life more difficult, if it makes things heavier and more burdensome, it's not accomplishing the task that Jesus wants for us. It has to be something different. Here are a couple of definitions of a rule of life that I appreciate, and these are two authors that you'll hear from fairly frequently throughout the series. The first being John Mark Comer from his book, Practicing the Way, from which we've named this series. He defines a rule of life simply like this: a plan to follow Jesus, to stay true to one's commitment to apprentice under him. I like that he uses that word apprentice there. Second, an author named Ken Shigematsu. Ken's a pastor in Vancouver, an author. He defines a rule of life similarly like this: a rhythm of practices that empowers us to live well and grow more like Jesus. That's all this is. It's a way of living that guides our life, guides our decisions to follow Jesus. The word for rule in Greek is actually the same as the word for trellis. Are you familiar with what a trellis is? For the non-gardeners in the room, a trellis is used to help a plant grow upwards. If you've walked through a vineyard or through a vegetable garden, you've seen them in use. It might have been like some fancy, gorgeous like metal structure. It might just be a piece of wood or some wire. But whatever it is, the intent is to help the plant have something structural to hold on to as it grows upwards. Because many plants, especially many fruit-bearing plants, without that trellis, without something to hold on to, they'll collapse under their own weight, and their fruit will simply rot on the ground long before it ripens, rendering it useless. So the trellis is there to support and guide the growth of the plant. And that's the idea of the rule of life for us. The rule functions in the same way. The form might look different, but the idea is simply that it would support and guide our spiritual growth so that we produce the fruit that Jesus wants us to produce. In John 15, verse 16, Jesus saying, "You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you that you should go and bear fruit, that your fruit should abide or remain, continue." So if we want to bear fruit, if we want to live the life that Jesus has called us to, we need something to support the structure of that growth. Think of it this way. Here's a diagram. This is from Ken Shigematsu's book, God Am I Everything. A fantastic read. Practicing the Way and God Am I Everything are both just really approachable, valuable reads for how to kind of build the idea of spiritual disciplines into your life. And we'll talk more about those later. But here's a picture that Ken Shigematsu talks about in his book of this trellis and what a rule of life looks like applied to this illustration. You can see it here, that at the very base, you see the roots, the bottom three: Sabbath, prayer, sacred reading. And he builds up the next level to relate, where there's friendship and sexuality in our family, and then restore our body and play and our money. At the very top, reaching out, talking about our work and justice and witness. The idea is that to support our growth, the trellis needs to guide it all the way through. Now, here's the problem for many of us as Christians, that in our spiritual life, most Christians build up some of the roots. We have some type of habit of prayer. We're probably praying some. You're probably reading the Bible a little bit. Maybe you're practicing Sabbath. You're getting to church a little bit. But then we don't build the trellis beyond that, and we wonder why we can't grow any farther. We wonder why we get frustrated in our efforts to pursue God. It's because you haven't built the trellis to support further growth. You haven't brought the other areas of your life in line with your pursuit of Christ. And that's what we need to do. You need to look up the ladder, say, like, are my friendships, is my sexuality, is that actually guided by who I am in Jesus? Is how I treat my family guided by Jesus? What about my physical health? What about the way I spend my money? Have I considered those things in light of being a disciple of Christ? If you haven't, then your trellis is not built to support further growth, and you'll find yourself frustrated over and over again because you just haven't put the structure in there to allow it to happen. The problem in society in general, but within Christians specifically, is that phenomenon called compartmentalization. All that means is that, like, we put different boxes of our lives into different areas and we don't allow them to interact. Over here, I'm a student, right? And over here, I have a job. And over here, I have a family. And how we behave in each of those sectors might be completely different, right? You might be a completely different person at school or at work than you are at home or with your friends. And we say, well, that's just normal. Yeah, but with Christ, we don't have that option. Jesus doesn't give us the option to compartmentalize and say, well, I'm just going to put Jesus in this box of my life over here. And this is who I am on Sundays, what I'm like around my Christian friends or when I'm at church. But that has nothing to do with my work life or my sex life or my family life or my friends. No, Jesus is just over there. Jesus is not okay with that. He makes it explicitly clear that we cannot live that way as a follower of his. Luke 14:33 says it like this: "Therefore, any one of you who does not renounce all that he has cannot be my disciple." Everything in our life must be brought into line with our pursuit of Jesus. There are no accidental saints. To live the life with God that I long for, I need to plan for it. I need to build it. So let's talk about living life intentionally then, about building this strategy, about kind of thinking through these things with intention. The rule of life is designed to accomplish that for us, to help us to build out a life that helps us to flourish, not only in our relationship with Jesus, but in everything, by bringing them all into proper alignment. Think about it this way. If you're building a home, some of you have had the opportunity to do that at one point in your life or not. All right, some of you guys were builders many times. But if you're deciding, like, hey, we need a house, you wouldn't just get up one day, drive over to Home Hardware, walk through the aisles, and just start grabbing supplies. Like, ooh, there's some lumber, might need that, some drywall, there's some screws, ooh, a toilet, probably going to come in handy. Load up the van, drive to a blank piece of land, dump them out, and just start hammering. It's not how we build a house, right? Well, first you need to own the land, and you need to get a design and permits, and you're going to need some servicing there. You're probably going to want sewers and electrical. right? You're going to need a design. You need a whole whack of different trades to come in and help you build it. You need a whole lot of supplies and a ton of stuff you never even thought about to actually make the thing happen and for it to turn out the way you hoped it would. If you go without a plan, sooner or later, it's going to be a disaster. But we don't treat our life with Christ, we don't treat our discipleship with that same level of intention. We look at building a house, we're like, well, of course you need a plan. Of course it's going to take time. Of course you need to be organized and strategic. With our discipleship, we're like, well, like I read the Bible a bit when I have time, and I pray occasionally when I really need something and the other stuff didn't work, and I get to church when it's convenient, when the golf schedule doesn't get in the way, and then we're frustrated. Like, I can't believe I don't feel closer to God. Like, that's the spiritual equivalent of dumping a pile of building supplies into a field and yelling, house, house, and wondering why it doesn't build itself. It's ridiculous. If you approach it with no strategy, if you approach it with no intention, of course you will not get the results that you want. It's true across our entire life. Paul changes the analogy a little bit and he uses an athletic analogy to describe the same thing in 1 Corinthians chapter 9. He says this, do you not know that in a race, all the runners run, but only one receives the prize? So run that you might obtain it. Every athlete exercises self-control in all things. They do it to receive a perishable wreath, but we an imperishable. That line in there, the athletes exercise self-control in all things. Here's an example. LeBron James. LeBron James is 41 this year and is still playing all-star caliber basketball in the NBA, which is bonkers. In the last few years, he's playing with the kids of guys he played with at the start of his career. Some of these guys were born after LeBron James was drafted into the NBA, and he's still going. Remarkable. 22 All-Star appearances, one of the best players who've ever played the game. If my son and I argue about who the best player is of all time, he's wrong. He's allowed to be. He likes LeBron James a lot more, but I'm not going to go down that route today. Why has he accomplished this? Why has LeBron achieved this? Well, obviously, he's a good basketball player, but that's really not the core of how he's accomplished it. Everything in his life has had to be aligned towards that goal. Strength training, diet, sleep, skills development, life off the court, keeping his family life and his personal life from being a disaster. All that stuff has to have been well managed and disciplined to achieve the type of success he has over such a long period. Plenty and plenty of work to get there, but his entire life aligned towards that goal. I think life with Christ is worthy of a similar effort. That we would align everything within our life towards that goal. If you do, you can accomplish something truly great. Now, you might counter, you might say, well, look, I could do all the same things LeBron did and never be the basketball player LeBron is. You're right. Like, you're not 6'8" or 6'9", whatever he is. You're likely not the gifted athlete with a vertical. Like, there's a lot of things working in his direction, right? But think about it this way. If you applied the same level of discipline and put in all the same work, how good would you turn out to be? Probably pretty remarkable. But you see, what we do is we use the greats as an excuse not to even try. Well, I could never be him, so I'm not even going to bother picking up a basketball. Well, that's not the point. We do the same thing spiritually. Look at the spiritual giants in history, Mother Teresa or St. Anthony, people like that, and say, wow, I can never be like that person, so I'm not even going to try. Or insert name of whatever Christian or person you know or follow in today. Well, they're like so-and-so, they're holier than I just can't live the life like they do. Bull. That's an excuse. You make an excuse, you create an excuse to give yourself a reason for not trying because you're lazy. Just because you don't think you can achieve what somebody else does is irrelevant because the point isn't the other person. The point is between you and Jesus. That's the goal. And this excuse, like, how many times do you hear people say colloquially, like, well, I'm no saint. Well, I get what you mean. But also, if you're a follower of Christ, yeah, you are. Now, you might not be a very good one, but that's a different question. Ephesians 2:19 says this, so then you are no longer strangers and aliens, but you are fellow citizens with the saints. with the saints and members of the household of God. I got to go to the Vatican City years ago. Angela and I took a trip there, right? And you walk in, if you've ever been there, you walk in, you know what it's called, like the grand kind of like open area outside of it, and there's these columns surrounding the whole open area, right? And there's like these statues of all the saints all the way around. If you're a follower of Christ, you belong up there just like every other one of them. You are a saint. Scary, I know. It's weird. And again, you might not be great at it. But the point is, you have been spiritually enabled by the Holy Spirit's presence in you to become a saint. It's not about how good you are. It's not how good Jesus is. And how good he's been to us. You have been made a saint by his sacrifice, by his blood, by his love for you, not by your work. So in response to that, we are called to live our life for him and to him, devoting all that we are to his service. Ken Shigematsu says it like this: the only tragedy in life is not to become a saint, because every follower of Christ has that potential. As we orient each sphere of our life toward Christ, we can become the saints God calls us to be. You become the saint that God has called you to be. You are perfectly capable. You have been spiritually enabled. The question is, are you willing to prioritize it? That's the question that we have to answer. Let's talk about actually building this out. So, okay, you made a point. I'm willing to talk about this. How do I actually go about building a rule of life? What does that actually look like practically for me? And let's go back to the idea of a trellis. The idea of the rule is simply to make my entire life serve to make me into the person Jesus has called to me. So I look at each of these areas and ask and look at my own life with the question simply, is what I'm doing here helping me or hurting me? Have you asked that question of your life? Are the things I do day in and day out, are they helping me become who I want to be, or are they hindering me from that? So look, if we start down with the roots, think through Sabbath and prayer. Am I practicing Sabbath right now? Am I taking a day of rest? Is it helping me or hurting me? What does my prayer life look like right now? Is that helping me or hurting me? What are the barriers that get in the way of that? Are those things helping or hurting me? If they're hurting, well, maybe make a plan to get rid of them. And if they're helping, maybe we make a plan to prioritize it. If you got some of those roots in place and we look up the ladder further, say like, is my relationship with my family, am I honoring God in the way I'm treating my family, whether it's my parents or my siblings or my own kids? Am I living that in a way that would honor Jesus? And if you're not sure what that looks like, the good news is Scripture has the answers for you. So you might just need to take some time to study there. Is my sexuality in line with what God has commanded me to do? Am I expressing that in a way that honors him? What needs to change? What's helping me and what's hurting me? If there's things there that are hurting me, I need to get rid of them. You work up the ladder. The point of that rule of life is to bring everything, every detail into line. All the way to the top, talking about your work. How is your work helping or hurting your walk with Christ? This is one of the idols that we have in our modern world. Because very few people will sacrifice their job or their career ambitions for their discipleship. Your job and your schedule might be ripping your family apart. It might prevent you from ever serving at church. It might prevent you from ever being here regularly. You're like, well, it's my job. What am I supposed to do? Well, if Christ calls us to lay everything on the altar, that would include your career, wouldn't it? So if it's destroying you, it's not worth the paycheck. We bring everything in line with our discipleship, everything in line with our desire and our pursuit following Jesus. 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 25 says it like this, verse 26. So I do not run aimlessly. This is Paul still on the athletic analogy. I do not box as one beating the air, but I discipline my body or my life itself and keep it under control, lest after preaching to others, I myself should be disqualified. And I hate that final line there because that's a scary one for those of us called to preach the word. See what he says there? I don't run aimlessly. Not just out here running through the woods hoping I'm going to find the destination. No, I run with intent to a destination, with a purpose. And with a plan, I know who I'm pursuing. I have a path and a plan for how I will get there. Now, as we go about life and trying to figure out how to bring everything in our life in order when following Jesus, one of the questions that we get asked as pastors all the time is, hey, so is this, and fill in the blank, whatever, sinful, right? Is this thing sinful? Is this practice sinful? Is this idea sinful? Get asked it all the time. And it's fine. I'm actually grateful for the question. And if there's things like that pop up in your life, you want to ask, please do. Because applying our modern lives to ancient scriptures requires constant interpretation and reinterpretation. There's always something new popping out that we're not really sure how to handle. So ask that question. It's great. It's valuable. But it's not the only question. Because the measure of what's good for us is not simply is it sinful or not. And that's maybe not the fully helpful question asked. The question is actually deeper than that. John Mark Comer phrases it well in his book, where he says it like this. I used to weigh potential behaviors with the question, is this sinful or not? But now that I better understand the gospel, my new question is, does this move me toward Jesus or away? Is it helping or hurting? See how that changes the question? Because there's plenty of activities that are not sinful in and of themselves, but might not be helpful. Right? This will come up again later when we talk about the specifics of a rule, but technology in our world is a perfect example. There's lots of great technology that we have access to that can be very useful, but the way we use it might not be helping us. It might have crept too far. Can you say, wow, it's sinful to do this? Probably not. But is it helping you? Is a deeper question for us to reflect on. See, boundaries, this rule, when properly applied, they don't create burden, they actually create freedom. And one of the common misconceptions about freedom is that freedom is the absence of any rules, any boundaries, any restrictions. That's not it. That's more chaos theory. Freedom means within a safe set of boundaries. Within that, I can explore. Within that, I can live as I'm called to. Freedom is all about boundaries. A country with no laws, a country with no rules, a country with no enforcement sounds free. It's not free. Turns into terror very quickly. But with the right boundaries in place, within that structure, we can live freely. Continuing on building this rule. John Mark Comer, in his book, again, Practicing the Way, he goes into some of the specifics of his personal rule of life and talks about some of the details of the things that he's put in. He talks about that he has a habit of, he daily takes time in the morning to read the Bible and to pray for a certain amount of time. He keeps a weekly Sabbath, and part of his rhythm of the weekly Sabbath is that he gathers with a group of believers to share a meal together. He has a monthly time where he spends a day alone in solitude. And those are kind of like his spiritual habits. Just some of them. But he also has a list of what he calls his anti-habits. Some things that he's put restrictions on, structures around, prevent them from kind of overwhelming his life. Right? One he talks about is that he puts his phone to bed at 8:30 p.m. every night. Tucks it away in a drawer. It's done for the day. He doesn't access it again until after he's done his morning prayer, Bible reading, and writing. He also talks for himself that he sets a weekly limit of 4 hours of media consumption per week. Television, movies, YouTube, 4 hours tops. That's the rule that he has put on himself. Now, I want you to ignore the details, because most of you tuned out as soon as I said 4 hours. You're like, nope. I'm going to knock that out by 5 p.m. today. Right? His specifics are not the point. His rule is not divine authority for all of us. These are the boundaries he's put on himself. What he has found helps him. So the point isn't the specifics of his rule. The point is, if you look back to the trellis, that he has built beyond the roots, and he's allowing his spiritual life to flow through every aspect of his life, even up to and including how he uses his phone. The details, the specifics, aren't as important as the fact that he has thought intentionally about how is each area of my life going to come in line with my desire to pursue Christ. The specifics, those are between you and God. The important part is that we actually take the time to think it through. Are these things helping or hurting? Because again, there are no accidental saints. To live the life with God that you long for, to live the life with Jesus that you long for, you need a plan to make it happen. Now, all this might just sound like too much work. Like, hey, that's great, really cool, half decent sermon, whatever. I'm never going to do it. Fine. That's okay. Right? And our intent as we go through these disciplines, by the way, I'm not hopeful that anybody's going to try and apply all 10 that we talk about this summer. That's not the goal. But think about this one for the rule of life. Whether you acknowledge it or not, you already have a rule of life. Every one of us already has a rule of life that we live by. You have a daily routine that you stick to. You have a schedule that you keep for work and the habits you have with your family and the rhythm you have for your spiritual practices. All of that is already in place. All of that already forms your rule of life. The question is it helping you or hurting you? Are you getting somewhere on purpose, or will you wind up somewhere by accident? So we each already live by a rule, simply whether or not we've thought about it. John Mark Comer says, it might be written or unwritten, conscious or subconscious, wise or foolish, but you have a way in which you live, a morning routine, a workday, a network of relationships, a budget, activities you spend your free time on. The question isn't, do you have a rule of life? It's, do you know what your rule of life is? And is it giving you the life that you want? It's a question worth asking. Worth evaluating the things in our life, and are they actually pointing us towards Jesus? Are they making us better people? Are they helping us to live the life we want or not? Here's a few things as we come towards the end here. What does a good rule of life actually do for us? What does it look like properly built out and applied? A few things. Number one, it can turn vision into reality. Right? You likely have a picture in your mind of what you wish your life looked like. You hopefully maybe have a picture in your mind of how you want your life with Christ to be specifically. What a rule of life can do is give us intention, give us a structure to say, here's how I'm actually going to get there. It can take it from being an idea, it can take it from being procrastinated about, it can take it from just being dreamed about, and actually help you build it into reality. Number two, it sets your pace. Have you ever felt like a passenger in your own life? Like the pace of the day is just carrying you along. You get up in the morning, your feet hit the ground, and then you're just sprinting through the day, then all of a sudden you're back in bed again, like, I don't even know what I did. And most of it I didn't want to do, I just had to do. Days like that can turn into weeks like that, can turn into months like that, can turn into years like that, can turn into your entire life. What a rule of life properly applied can do is to set the pace for you, to restrict the things you don't want to consume you, to encourage and carve out space for the things you do want to give time to. Put you back in the driver's seat, going where you intend to go instead of just being carried along by the busyness or the cares of the day. Third thing a good rule of life does is it bends. An illustration that Shigematsu uses in his book, he talks about Benedictine monks, and they live by a very strict rule of life in their convent, in their orders, and their monasteries. But he talks about one of the things with their rule of life is actually intended to bend. For instance, if they were in the middle of a fast, if they were all fasting and then received an unexpected guest, if somebody came to the door needing help or an unexpected visitor came by, the abbot, the lead monk, was ordered to and expected to break his fast to go and celebrate and welcome in the guest. Because the rule isn't supposed to get in the way of life. It's supposed to help things. So if something unexpected happens, well, you bend the rule for that time to allow for it. So a good rule of life bends. It's not meant to be a straitjacket that restrains you forever. It's meant to guide your decisions and guide your life. But there's going to be times, there's going to be exceptions. You're like, you know what? We need to set that aside for the moment. Hey, John's rule is to have 4 hours of media per week. But maybe if a new movie comes out that he's really excited to, maybe that week he's like, we're going to bend it a little bit. I'm going to take the kids to go see the movie. The good rule has to bend and have some flexibility. Again, it's a self-imposed rule. It's not an externally imposed law that you're going to get punished for violating. That's not the point. Fourth, finally, the good rule makes you more like Jesus. Properly applied, looking to each area of our life, all the way up the trellis, will help us to pursue Christ. The goal of any spiritual discipline is first, foremost, and only to make you more like Jesus. It's not about making you look holy to other people. It's not about like appeasing your conscience. It's not about checking off some list to hope that God's going to like, if I do this spiritual discipline, then I can get away with this sin, and God's going to feel better about me. It's not about any of that. It's just to help you experience and follow and become more like Jesus himself. That's the goal. That's the intent. That's it. I'll conclude just with a couple of resources to point you towards. We've already referred to the two of them today. These two books, Ken Shigematsu, Canadian author, pastor of a church called 10th Church in Vancouver, wrote a book called God Am I Everything, which he says in the subtitle, An Ancient Rhythm Helps Busy People Enjoy God. He does a great job of like taking all these spiritual disciplines and showing what it can actually look like to apply them in the midst of the real world. His story is cool. He was an executive with Sony in Tokyo, Japan before he became a pastor. So he has lived about the fastest paced corporate life you could imagine, and then became a pastor and has now worked to help people find this way of living the rhythm with Christ in the midst of our busy daily lives. The other book, Practicing the Way by John Mark Comer, who again, we've quoted from a bit today. What I really appreciate about Comer's practice is that he speaks of the spiritual disciplines and this path of following Christ as us being apprentices under Jesus. All right, and the disciplines are tools of the trade. Tools that will help us accomplish the apprenticeship better. And he does a great job of building out that analogy. And what's great about Practicing the Way is that on top of that, there's a website called practicingtheway.org that has every resource you could possibly want or need to practice any one of these disciplines. So whether you as an individual or maybe with your small group, if you're like, hey, we want to dive into one of these, like you hear one of the messages, you're like, oh, we want to learn more about a rule of life or more about how to pray or more about solitude. Go to practicingtheway.org, and there's an entire course around each of the practices, including materials to help you actually do it yourself. Again, our goal, our hope isn't that you would have try all 10 disciplines that we'll talk about through the summer. My hope personally as your pastor is that maybe you'll see one or two of them and you're like, you know what, that's worth trying. And give that a shot. Practicingtheway.org will give you the resources you need to go and try it out. Remember, as we've said, there are no accidental saints. To live the life with Jesus that you long for, you need a plan to make it happen. The rule of life can help you achieve that. Remember, the goal always and only is to become more like Jesus. Let me pray for you. God, thank you for these historic practices, these things that Christians have done throughout the centuries that have helped us to follow you, help us to learn about you, help us to know you better. God, as we journey through the summer, as we learn about different practices and disciplines, help us to see in our life, God, how they may help us to follow you better, help us to serve you better. To help us to make us more like you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.